The invitation arrived on a night when the moon hung bloated and crimson over the city of Valenmore, a celestial omen that the superstitious whispered meant blood would be spilled before dawn. I held the black envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of parchment that seemed too heavy for paper, too cold for something that had passed through mortal hands. The wax seal bore a crest I recognized from tavern tales and drunkards' warnings, a rose entwined with thorns, weeping drops of what could have been either dew or blood. The seal of House Noctera. The seal of the vampire queen herself. My name is Lucian Avrith, and I have always been a man who laughed in the face of danger, not because I was particularly brave, but because I had learned long ago that life was far too short and far too strange to be taken seriously. At 28, I had already lived more lives than most men twice my age. I had been a soldier in the border wars, a card sharp in the gambling dens of the lower city, a sometimes thief, a sometimes hero, and always a man who could talk his way into or out of nearly any situation. My friends called me charming. My enemies called me insufferable. I considered both assessments equally accurate. The invitation itself was simple, written in silver ink that seemed to shimmer and move in the candlelight. You are cordially invited to the twilight ball at Castle Noctera. Midnight. Come alone. Dress to impress or don't come at all. There was no signature, but none was needed. Everyone in Valenmore knew that the vampire queen, Lady Seraphine Noctera, hosted these elaborate affairs once every decade, and that those who attended either came back changed forever or didn't come back at all. I should have burned it. I should have laughed it off as some elaborate prank. Instead, I found myself standing before my cracked mirror 2 hours before midnight, adjusting a burgundy vest over a black silk shirt I'd won in a card game from a nobleman who'd had more money than sense. My dark hair was swept back from my face, revealing sharp cheekbones and gray eyes that had seen too much and somehow still found the world amusing. I looked like trouble, which was appropriate because I had every intention of causing some. "You're actually going," my roommate Marcus said from the doorway, his voice heavy with the resignation of a man who had tried and failed many times to inject common sense into my decision-making process. "You're actually going to walk into a castle full of vampires because you got a fancy invitation." "Not just because of the invitation," I replied, flashing him a grin as I fastened a silver cuff at my wrist. "I'm going because Demon bet me 50 gold crowns that I wouldn't have the nerve to flirt with the vampire queen herself." Marcus closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture I had become intimately familiar with over our 5 years of friendship. "Lucian. Demon is an idiot who once tried to wrestle a bear because someone questioned his masculinity. He is not the benchmark for good decisions." 50 gold crowns, Marcus. Do you know what I could do with 50 gold crowns? I turned to face him, spreading my arms. I could pay off my debts. I could buy that townhouse near the river you're always saying we should move to. I could eat something other than stale bread and questionable cheese for an entire month. You could also end up as a midnight snack for a creature that has lived for centuries and has probably forgotten more ways to kill a man than you'll ever know, Marcus countered, but his voice had already lost its edge. He knew as well as I did that once I'd made up my mind, there was no stopping me. It was simultaneously my greatest strength and most catastrophic flaw. The walk to Castle Noctera took me through the oldest part of Valenmore, where the streets narrowed to barely more than alleys and the buildings leaned toward each other like gossiping old women. The cobblestones were slick with recent rain, and fog had begun to roll in from the river, wrapping itself around lampposts and doorways like a living thing. The few people I passed hurried along with their heads down, clutching talismans and holy symbols, no doubt aware that tonight was a night when the supernatural felt particularly close. Castle Noctera stood on a cliff overlooking the city, a magnificent and terrible structure of black stone and soaring spires that seemed to claw at the sky. Gargoyles perched along the battlements, their stone faces frozen in expressions of eternal anguish or dark amusement. I could never quite decide which. As I approached the main gate, it swung open without a sound, as if the castle itself had been waiting for me. I should have taken that as a warning. Instead, I straightened my vest and walked inside. The entry hall was a study in Gothic grandeur. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows above, supported by columns carved with scenes of ancient battles and forgotten rituals. Candles floated in midair, their flames burning in colors that candles had no business burning: deep purple, midnight blue, a green that reminded me of poison. The floor was polished black marble that reflected everything like dark water, creating the dizzying impression that I was walking through two castles simultaneously, one above and one below. Other guests had already arrived, and I recognized the telltale signs of Valenmoor's elite: nobles in their finest silks, merchants who had bought their way into respectability, a few adventurers who had clearly come seeking favor or employment from the vampire nobility. They clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices, their eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. I wondered how many of them had come willingly and how many had received invitations they couldn't refuse. A servant appeared at my elbow so suddenly that I actually startled, a rare occurrence for someone with my reflexes. He was pale and thin, with eyes that didn't quite focus on anything, moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had forgotten what it meant to be fully alive. "This way, sir," he intoned in a voice like wind through a crypt. "The Queen will receive guests in the grand ballroom." I followed him through a maze of corridors, each more opulent and unsettling than the last. Portraits lined the walls, depicting men and women in clothing that spanned centuries, all of them beautiful and terrible and watching me with painted eyes that seemed far too aware. In one painting, I could have sworn I saw the subject's chest rise and fall with breath. I forced myself to look away and keep walking. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of darkness and decadence. Chandeliers dripping with black crystals hung from a ceiling painted with a mural of the night sky, stars that actually twinkled with captured light. The walls were draped in crimson and black silk, and the floor was so highly polished that it mirrored the entire room perfectly, creating a vertiginous sense of infinite space. Musicians played in a corner, their instruments producing music that felt less heard than experienced, a symphony that resonated in the chest and made the heart beat in strange rhythms. And there, on a balcony overlooking the ballroom, framed by massive arched windows through which the full moon poured its silver light, stood the vampire queen. Lady Seraphine Noctera was everything the legends promised and nothing I had prepared myself for. She stood with the casual confidence of someone who had commanded armies and toppled kingdoms, wearing a gown of black silk and crimson velvet that clung to her form like a second skin before flowing out behind her in a train that seemed to move of its own accord. Metallic details caught the light: silver chains, blood-red rubies, ornate clasps that looked like they belonged in a museum or a nightmare. Her hair was a cascade of midnight black that fell past her shoulders, occasionally stirring in a breeze that didn't exist, and her skin was so pale it seemed to glow with its own inner light, flawless as moonlight on snow. But it was her eyes that captured me, crimson eyes that burned with an inner fire, ancient and hungry and amused. And when she smiled, I caught the glimpse of fangs behind full lips, a reminder that for all her beauty she was a predator who had likely claimed more lives than I could count. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and in that moment I felt something shift in the air, a change in pressure like the moment before lightning strikes. She tilted her head slightly, and I saw the corner of her mouth quirk up in what might have been amusement or curiosity or challenge. Behind her, spread wide in a display that was both magnificent and terrifying, were wings, massive, bat-like appendages of darkness and membrane, each one easily spanning 10 feet, with claws at the joints and veins that pulsed with faint red light. She was death and desire made manifest, power and beauty twisted into something that transcended both, and I was an idiot with a wager to win and a constitutionally inability to back down from anything. So I did what any reasonable man in my position would never do. I grinned, raised my glass in a casual salute, and began making my way toward the balcony. The crowd parted before me like water, nobles and merchants stumbling over themselves to get out of my path, their faces reflecting varying degrees of horror and morbid fascination. I heard whispers following me, warnings hissed in urgent tones, but I ignored them all. Marcus had once told me that I had a gift for ignoring good advice, and I wasn't about to prove him wrong now. The stairs to the balcony were carved from black marble, each step inlaid with silver designs that formed patterns I couldn't quite focus on, protective wards probably, or perhaps just decoration meant to unsettle. I climbed them with easy confidence, very aware that every eye in the ballroom was now watching me, and very aware that I was either about to win the easiest 50 gold crowns of my life or make the last mistake I would ever make. Lady Seraphine watched me approach with those burning crimson eyes, and as I drew closer, I could see the subtle play of emotion across her perfect features. Surprise that I had dared to approach at all, curiosity about what I might do next, and underneath it all, something that might have been boredom finally giving way to interest. Up close, she was even more striking, her features carved with an inhuman perfection that suggested she had been beautiful as a mortal and become something beyond beautiful in undeath. I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to be bold but not close enough to be suicidal, and executed a bow that was just formal enough to be respectful and just casual enough to be irreverent. "My lady," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my survival instincts were screaming at me to run. "I have to say the legends don't do you justice. They forgot to mention the wings." Her eyebrow arched, a gesture so small and yet so expressive it could have filled volumes. "The legends forget many things," she replied, her voice like velvet dragged over steel, musical and dangerous. "They also, apparently, forget to mention that mortals should approach their queen with more caution than you seem to possess. Tell me, bold one, do you have a death wish, or are you simply too foolish to recognize danger when you see it?" "Neither, actually," I said, taking another step closer into the space that most people would consider far too intimate, the space reserved for lovers or enemies about to draw blades. "I'm just a man who appreciates beauty when he sees it, and you, my lady, are the most beautiful thing I've seen in this or any lifetime. Though I have to ask, do you always greet your admirers with threats or am I special?" The ballroom had gone utterly silent. I could feel hundreds of eyes on us, could sense the collective held breath of everyone watching this exchange. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the part that had kept me alive through wars and heists and countless stupid decisions was noting that her hands had beautiful fingers tipped with nails that looked more like claws, and that her wings had shifted slightly, the massive appendages moving with liquid grace that suggested she could strike faster than I could blink. But the larger part of my mind, the part that had always gotten me into trouble, was focused on the fact that Lady Seraphine Noctera, the vampire queen herself, was looking at me with something that was definitely interest and might have been the faintest trace of amusement. "You are either remarkably brave or remarkably stupid," she said, taking a step toward me that closed the distance between us to mere inches. This close I could smell her, roses and night air and something darker, copper and cold stone. "I have not decided which. Men have been executed for less presumption than you've shown in the last 30 seconds. "Then I suppose I should make the most of the next 30, I replied, and before I could think better of it, before that voice of reason could gain enough volume to stop me, I reached out and gently took her hand, raising it toward my lips. Her skin was cool beneath my fingers, not cold as I'd expected, but carrying the temperature of marble that had been sitting in shadow. Would the queen honor a foolish mortal with a dance? I promised to make it worth your while. I'm told I have excellent rhythm. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, nothing happened. Lady Seraphine stood perfectly still, her eyes locked with mine, her expression unreadable. The tension in the air had become so thick I could practically taste it, metallic and electric. Her wings spread wider, blocking out some of the moonlight, casting us both in shadow. And then she laughed. It was not the laugh I expected, not cruel or mocking or tinged with madness. It was genuine, surprised, the laugh of someone who had lived centuries and thought nothing could catch them off guard anymore. It transformed her face, softening the predatory edges, revealing something almost vulnerable beneath the layers of power and immortality. "You," she said, her voice rich with that lingering amusement, "are either the bravest fool I have met in 300 years, or the most entertaining meal to walk through my doors." She glanced down at where I still held her hand, then back up at me, and I saw something kindle in those crimson depths, something dangerous and playful all at once. "Very well, bold mortal. One dance. But know this, I do not dance gently and I do not let go easily. Are you certain you want to begin something you may not be able to finish?" "My lady," I replied, pulling her closer as the musicians below seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and began playing something slow and hypnotic. "I've never been certain of anything in my life. I don't see why I should start now." And there, on the Gothic balcony of Castle Noctera, Beneath a full moon that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, surrounded by shadows and witness to forces beyond mortal comprehension, I began to dance with the vampire queen. Her body moved against mine with a grace that spoke of centuries of practice, every step perfect, every turn executed with fluid precision. But there was nothing cold or mechanical about it. She danced with passion, with presence, her eyes never leaving mine, one hand in my grip and the other resting just over my heart, where I was certain she could feel it racing. Her wings folded partially, creating a canopy of darkness around us, and suddenly it felt like we were the only two beings in existence, moving through space to music that seemed to emanate from the universe itself. "What's your name, fool?" she asked, her lips dangerously close to my ear, her breath cool against my skin. "Lucian," I replied, spinning her out and then pulling her back, closer than before, close enough that I could see flecks of darker red in her crimson irises. "Lucian Avrith. Professional charmer, amateur survivor, and currently the luckiest man in Valenmore." "Lucian," she repeated, tasting my name like wine. "Tell me, Lucian Avrith, what makes a mortal man walk into a vampire's castle and flirt with death itself? Is it bravery? Stupidity? A wager, perhaps? I should have lied. I should have claimed some noble purpose or romantic idealism. Instead, because I had apparently lost all sense of self-preservation, I told her the truth. All three, actually, though mostly the wager. 50 gold crowns says I wouldn't have the nerve to flirt with you. I'm not a man who backs down from a challenge, even when the challenge involves fangs and centuries-old supernatural power." She threw her head back and laughed again, the sound echoing across the ballroom, and I realized that I was quickly becoming addicted to that sound, to being the one who could coax it from her. 50 gold crowns, she mused. You risked your life for 50 gold crowns. I should be insulted. I should drain you dry for the presumption. And yet, she leaned in, her lips brushing the shell of my ear, I find myself charmed. What a terrible development for you, Lucian Avrith. Why terrible? I asked, though my voice came out rougher than intended. The proximity of her, the smell of her, the way her body moved with mine, it was intoxicating in ways that had nothing to do with vampire magic and everything to do with the simple, dangerous fact that she was the most captivating being I had ever encountered. "Because," she whispered, her fangs grazing my earlobe in a gesture that sent electricity down my spine, "I have lived for 3 centuries, and in all that time, I have learned that the things which charm me tend to end up changed, transformed, bound to me in ways that most mortals cannot comprehend and fewer still survive. You came here for a wager, for gold and glory and a story to tell in taverns. But you've caught my attention, and my attention, dear Lucian, is not a prize, it's a curse." The music swelled around us, and small sparks of magic began to appear in the air, ruby-red lights that danced and swirled like fireflies made of blood, responding to the energy building between us. The moon seemed to grow brighter, pressing against the windows as if trying to bear witness, and I became aware that the fog outside had thickened, tendrils of it creeping through gaps in the stone, wrapping around the columns of the balcony. I should have been afraid. Every instinct I possessed should have been screaming at me to run, to break away, to thank her for the dance and disappear into the night. But I found myself pulling her closer instead, my hands sliding from her waist to the small of her back, my face inches from hers, close enough to see the way her pupils dilated, close enough to feel the absence of breath that should have been there. "Then curse me," I heard myself say, and I meant it. God's help me, I meant every word. I've lived my whole life playing it safe when it mattered and taking stupid risks when it didn't. Just once, I'd like to take a risk that actually means something. Even if it destroys me. Maybe especially if it destroys me. Something shifted in her expression then, the amusement giving way to something deeper, something almost like recognition. Her free hand came up to my face, cool fingers tracing the line of my jaw, her claw-like nails trailing against my skin without breaking it, though we both knew she could open my throat with less effort than I used to breathe. "You say that now," she murmured, "but you don't understand what you're asking for. You don't know what I am, what I've done, what I'm capable of doing. You see beauty and danger and think them exciting, think them romantic. You don't see the centuries of blood, the empires I've watched rise and fall, the lovers I've taken and lost and sometimes destroyed with my own hands. You don't see the monster, Lucian. You only see the mask I wear. Then show me the monster, I challenged, because apparently I had completely lost my mind. You're right, I don't know you, and I'm sure if I did, I'd probably be terrified. But here's what I do know. I've spent my entire life around people who pretend to be more than they are, who wear masks of respectability over cores of rot. You're the first person, creature, being, whatever you want to call yourself, who seems completely, unapologetically real. So yes, maybe I'm being an idiot. Maybe this is the worst decision I'll ever make. But at least it's a decision that feels like it matters. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Lady Seraphine stared at me with those ancient crimson eyes, and I could feel the weight of her gaze, the centuries of experience and power and knowledge that separated us. I had the sudden, visceral understanding that she could kill me in a dozen different ways before I could even register the movement, that my life was balanced on a knife's edge and the only thing determining which way I fell was her whim. Then she smiled, not the amused smirk from before, but something genuine and perhaps a little sad, and pressed her forehead against mine, her eyes closing for just a moment. "You beautiful, stupid, brave fool," she whispered. "You have no idea what you've just done." And she kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was possession and challenge and promise all at once, her lips cool against mine, her hand fisting in my hair to pull me closer. I tasted copper and wine and something else, something that might have been magic or might have been simply her, and I kissed her back with everything I had, one hand tangling in her midnight hair, the other pressed against her back where I could feel the powerful muscles that controlled those magnificent wings. The sparks in the air exploded into something like fireworks, ruby and crimson light cascading around us, and I felt rather than heard a collective gasp from the ballroom below. We were creating a spectacle, I realized dimly, giving every noble and merchant and supernatural being in attendance something to witness and whisper about. But I couldn't bring myself to care, because Lady Seraphine Noctera was kissing me like I was air and she was drowning, and nothing else in the world seemed remotely important. When she finally pulled back, I was breathing hard, a distinctly mortal problem that she didn't share, and her eyes had taken on an even deeper crimson glow. Her wings had spread wide again, blocking out the moon entirely, wrapping partially around us in a gesture that felt possessive and protective all at once. "The wager," she said, her voice rough with emotion I couldn't name. "You'll win your 50 gold crowns. But there will be a price, Lucian Avrith. There is always a price for catching the attention of something ancient and hungry. Are you prepared to pay it? What's the price?" I managed to ask, though part of me didn't care, would have agreed to anything in that moment. Her smile was beautiful and terrible and absolutely without mercy. "You'll have to stay and find out. 1 month. Give me 1 month here in my castle by my side. Let me show you what I really am, what my world really is. And at the end of that month, if you still wish to leave, I will let you go with enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of your natural life. But if you stay," she leaned in, her lips brushing mine in a ghost of a kiss, "if you stay, I will show you immortality. I will show you power. I will show you what it means to be mine. Choose now, foolish mortal. The door is behind you. The abyss is before you. Which will it be?" I should have chosen the door. I should have bowed, thanked her for the dance, collected my winnings from Demon, and never looked back. I should have valued my ordinary, comfortable, survivable life over whatever darkness she was offering. But I had always been terrible at doing what I should. 1 month, I agreed, and sealed my fate with another kiss as the castle seemed to shudder around us, as if the very stones were bearing witness to a bargain made between mortal and immortal, foolishness and desire, life and death. Below us the ball continued, but I barely noticed. The vampire queen had claimed me with a kiss on a Gothic balcony beneath a full moon, and somewhere in the city beyond, in a tavern I would not return to for a very long time, Demon was about to owe me 50 gold crowns. It was the best and worst victory I had ever won. The morning after the ball, I woke in a room that belonged in a fever dream. The bed was massive, carved from black wood and draped with crimson silk that felt like water against my skin. The ceiling soared above me, lost in shadows that the sunlight streaming through heavy curtains couldn't quite penetrate. I sat up slowly, taking inventory. I was still dressed, mostly, though my vest was gone and my shirt had been unbuttoned. There were no bite marks on my neck, no signs of violence or violation. Just a lingering sense of unreality and a dull headache that suggested I'd drunk more wine than was wise. A servant appeared, the same pale, hollow-eyed man from the previous night, carrying a tray with breakfast. Fresh bread, cheese, fruit that looked almost too vibrant to be real, and a glass of something dark red that I very much hoped was wine and not the obvious alternative. He set it down on a table near the window without speaking, bowed mechanically, and disappeared like smoke. I ate slowly, trying to organize my thoughts. I had agreed to stay a month. I had kissed the vampire queen. I had, in all likelihood, made a series of decisions that future historians, if anyone bothered to remember me, would classify under catastrophically stupid. And yet, as I sat there watching dust motes dance in the morning light, I found I had no regrets. Not yet, anyway. Lady Seraphine came to me on the second day, arriving in my room as the sun was setting, filling the doorway with her presence. She wore a simpler gown than the one from the ball, though simple was relative when discussing the wardrobe of vampire royalty. This one was deep purple, almost black, and it moved around her like living shadow. Her wings were folded against her back, and in the softer evening light, she looked less like a predator and more like something from a painting. Beautiful, untouchable, unreal. "Come," she said without preamble. "If you're to stay here for a month, you need to understand what my world is. And you cannot understand it from the safety of this room." She led me through the castle, and I began to comprehend the true scope of Castle Noctera. It was not simply a building but a city unto itself, with levels that descended deep into the earth and towers that climbed toward the sky. We walked through galleries filled with artwork spanning millennia, each piece perfectly preserved. Paintings that predated the current kingdom by centuries, sculptures from cultures I didn't recognize, tapestries depicting wars and celebrations and horrors I couldn't quite parse. "I've been collecting for 300 years, Seraphine explained as we walked, her hand resting lightly on my arm in a gesture that felt both casual and possessive. "Every beautiful thing I find, every piece that speaks to something in me, I preserve it here. Art is the only thing that makes immortality bearable, Lucian. When you've seen empires rise and fall, when you've watched generations live and die in the span of what feels like a heartbeat, art becomes the only constant. The only thing that remains true." We descended into the lower levels, where the stone walls gave way to something older, rougher, clearly predating the castle proper. Here the air grew colder and I could hear sounds in the darkness. Whispers, movement, things I couldn't identify and wasn't sure I wanted to. Seraphine noticed my tension and smiled. "This is the Undercroft," she said. "Where my kind sleep during the day, where we keep those who have broken our laws, where the oldest secrets are buried. You should be afraid here, Lucian. Everything in your body should be screaming at you to run. But you're still walking beside me. Why?" I thought about that, really thought about it. "Because I'm more curious than I am smart," I finally admitted. "And because I think you're testing me, trying to scare me into leaving. And I'm too stubborn to give you the satisfaction." She laughed at that, the sound echoing off ancient stone. "Oh, I like you," she said, and it sounded almost surprised, almost pleased. "I really do. This is going to be either wonderful or absolutely catastrophic." On the third day she introduced me to her court. The throne room was vast and Gothic, all soaring arches and stained glass windows that depicted scenes of beauty and violence in equal measure. Vampires of varying ages and powers lounged on cushioned benches or stood in shadowed alcoves, and when Seraphine entered with me at her side, every eye turned to assess the mortal who had somehow earned the queen's attention. "This is Lucian Averith," Seraphine announced, her voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "He is under my protection for the duration of his stay. Anyone who harms him answers to me personally. Am I understood?" The murmur of acknowledgement that followed was less than enthusiastic, and I could feel the weight of dozens of predatory gazes, measuring me, calculating my worth, wondering what I tasted like. But no one challenged Seraphine directly, and I realized with a chill that her power here was absolute. She was not simply a queen in title, she was the apex predator in a castle full of predators, and her word was law. Among her court, I met Lord Vasilis, an ancient vampire with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, who looked at me as if I were an interesting insect he was considering dissecting. Lady Morgana, who was beautiful in the way that poisonous things are beautiful, all curves and red lips and a smile that promised pain. And Kieran, who appeared no older than 20 but claimed to have been turned during the last Great War, and who was the only one who spoke to me with something approaching friendliness. "You've certainly caused a stir," Kieran said during a brief moment when Seraphine was occupied with formal court business. "She hasn't taken an interest in a mortal in as long as I've been here. The last one didn't end well." "How didn't it end well?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Kieran's smile was sympathetic. "She loved him. And he loved her. And when he asked her to turn him, to make him immortal so they could be together forever, she did. But immortality isn't a gift, Lucian. It's a curse that looks like a gift. He couldn't handle it, the hunger, the darkness, the weight of eternity. He went mad within a year and threw himself into sunlight. Burned to ash while she watched. She hasn't let herself care for a mortal since. Until, apparently, you." I processed that information with a growing sense of unease. "So what you're saying is, I should be careful not to fall in love with her." "What I'm saying," Kieran replied, his expression serious, "is that it's probably already too late for both of you, and that scares me more than anything else in this castle." On the 5th day, Seraphine took me hunting. We rode out from the castle on horses that were far too intelligent and well-behaved to be entirely normal, into forests where the trees grew so thick that they blocked out the moon. She taught me to move quietly through the undergrowth, to read tracks and signs, to sense the presence of life in the darkness. But we weren't hunting animals. "There are creatures in these woods," she explained as we moved through the shadows, "that prey on travelers and villagers. Werewolves, ghouls, worse things. Part of my responsibility as the ruler of this region is to keep them in check, to ensure they don't upset the balance between the natural and supernatural worlds. Tonight you'll see what I really am, Lucian. Not the queen in the castle, not the woman who dances and kisses. The hunter. The killer. The monster." We found our quarry in a clearing, 3 werewolves, massive and savage, their fur matted with blood from some recent kill. They saw us and charged, and I watched as Seraphine transformed from regal queen to pure predator in the space of a heartbeat. Her wings spread wide, and she launched herself into the air with speed that defied physics, becoming a blur of darkness and violence. She moved through the werewolves like a dancer through still water, graceful and terrible, her claws opening throats and her fangs finding purchase in necks, and when it was over, all 3 lay dead or dying, and she stood among them, her dress ruined by blood, her eyes glowing with savage satisfaction. She looked at me then, her expression unreadable, waiting for my reaction. Waiting for the horror, the disgust, the fear that would prove I couldn't handle what she was. I walked to her through the carnage, my boots squelching in blood-soaked earth, and pulled her into a kiss that tasted of copper and death and something wild. "You're magnificent," I told her when I finally pulled back, and I meant it. Something in her eyes softened then, the glow fading to a simpler crimson, and she touched my face with blood-stained fingers. "You're broken in all the right ways," she whispered. "This is going to end terribly, isn't it?" "Probably," I agreed. "But at least it'll be interesting." By the 7th day I had established something resembling a routine. I woke at sunset, when Seraphine rose from whatever rest vampires required. We would take meals together, me eating, her watching with amusement, and she would tell me stories of her life, of the centuries she'd lived, of empires and wars and loves and losses. She spoke of being human once, so long ago that she barely remembered it, of being turned by a vampire whose name she refused to speak, of clawing her way to power through centuries of blood and politics. In turn, I told her about my life, which seemed pathetically short and uneventful by comparison. I told her about growing up poor in the lower city, about learning to survive by my wits and charm, about the border wars and the things I'd seen there that had convinced me life was too short to waste on fear. I told her about Marcus and Demon and the small circle of friends who had become my chosen family. I told her about the restlessness that had always lived in my chest, the sense that I was meant for something more than the ordinary life I'd been living. "You were meant to find me," she said one evening as we stood on that same balcony where we'd first danced. The moon was waning now, no longer full, but still bright enough to cast everything in silver light. Or I was meant to find you. I'm not sure which, but I think we were inevitable, Lucian. I think the universe has been pushing us toward this moment for longer than either of us realizes. That's a romantic thought for someone who claims to be a monster, I observed. Romance and monstrosity aren't mutually exclusive, she replied. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes the most romantic gesture is choosing to be gentle when you have the power to be cruel. Sometimes the most monstrous thing you can do is love someone you know you'll destroy. She turned to face me fully, her wings spreading slightly, framing her in darkness and moonlight. 3 weeks remain of your month, Lucian Avrath. Are you beginning to regret your choice? Are you starting to see the shape of the cage you've walked into? I considered lying, but I'd learned over the past week that Seraphine could smell a lie the way sharks smell blood in water. So I told her the truth. I don't feel caged, I said. I feel more free than I've ever been. And that's probably the most dangerous thing about this whole situation. You're not keeping me here with chains or compulsion or threats. I'm staying because I want to, because every day with you is more alive than any year I lived before. And yes, that terrifies me because I know there are only 3 weeks left and then I have to choose, walk away or stay forever. And I already know which one I'm going to choose, and that scares me more than anything else. Seraphine closed her eyes, her expression pained. Don't say that. Don't decide yet. You don't know what forever means, Lucian. You don't understand what you'd be giving up. Your humanity. Your warmth. The taste of food and the need for sleep and the simple animal pleasure of being alive. Your friends, your family, everything you've ever known. You'd be choosing darkness and blood and an eternity of watching everything you might have loved turn to dust. That's not a gift, it's a prison sentence that never ends. Then why do you keep doing it? I challenged. If immortality is so terrible, if being what you are is such a curse, why do you keep going? Why not walk into the sun like that man Kieran told me about? Why fight to survive for 3 centuries if survival isn't worth it? She opened her eyes and I saw something in them I'd never seen before, vulnerability, raw and exposed. Because every few centuries I meet someone like you, she whispered. Someone who makes me remember what it felt like to be human. Someone who makes me think that maybe, just maybe, eternity might be bearable if I don't have to face it alone. And then I watch them age and die, or I turn them and watch them break under the weight of what I've made them, and I remember why I should stay alone. But I never learn, Lucian. I never learn. I pulled her into my arms, feeling the coolness of her body against mine, the immense strength barely restrained beneath pale skin. Then maybe this time will be different, I said. Maybe I won't break. Maybe I'm exactly as broken as I need to be to survive this. Or maybe we'll both crash and burn in spectacular fashion. But I'd rather burn with you than live 100 safe years without you. She kissed me then, deeply, desperately, and I tasted salt on her lips and realized with shock that she was crying, tears of blood running down her perfect cheeks, leaving crimson trails on skin like snow. I kissed them away, tasting copper and sorrow and something else, something that might have been hope or might have been the last remnants of whatever had once been human in her. The moon watched silently as the vampire queen and her mortal fool held each other on a balcony between darkness and dawn, both of them knowing that the end was inevitable and neither of them willing to let go. 3 weeks, I thought. 3 weeks to decide if I want to live forever or if I want to live at all. It wasn't enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was all we had. The second week in Castle Noctera passed in a rhythm that felt both dreamlike and more real than anything I'd experienced in my mortal life. Seraphine showed me her world in layers, each one peeled back to reveal something darker and stranger and somehow more beautiful than the last. I learned that vampire society had rules as complex as any human court, with hierarchies and alliances and blood feuds that stretched back centuries. I learned that the supernatural world was vast and varied, filled with creatures I'd thought existed only in stories, fae who dealt in bargains and half-truths, demons who walked in human skin, spirits who haunted the boundaries between life and death. But more than the world around me, I learned about Seraphine herself. She took me to her private chambers, rooms that no one else in the castle was permitted to enter, and showed me the remnants of her human life. A locket containing a portrait of people who might have been her family, their faces worn almost smooth by centuries of her fingers tracing them. A diary written in a language that had been dead for 200 years, filled with the thoughts of a young woman who had no idea what she was about to become. A wedding dress, preserved in a glass case, meant for a marriage that had never happened because her would-be husband had been killed in a war she could no longer name. "I was 17, she told me as we stood before the case, her reflection absent in the glass, only mine staring back. 17 and stupid and so certain that I knew what love was. When he died, I wanted to die too. I did everything I could to follow him, stopped eating, walked into dangerous places, courted death in a dozen different ways. And then death came, but not in the form I expected. A vampire found me half dead already, and he saw something in me. Hunger. Rage. A will that refused to break even when my body was failing. So he offered me a choice: die as a mortal or live forever as something else. I chose immortality, thinking I would use it to honor my lost love, to make something meaningful of my pain." She turned away from the case, her wings rustling softly in the silence. "It took me less than a year to forget his name. Another year to forget his face. The human mind isn't built to hold memories for centuries, Lucian. They fade, they blur, they become stories you tell yourself rather than things you actually remember. I know I loved him because I wrote it in my diary, because I preserved this dress, because I can trace the shape of the grief I must have felt. But I don't actually remember loving him. It's like reading about someone else's life. And that, more than the hunger, more than the darkness, is what makes immortality a curse. You don't just lose the people you love, you lose the memory of loving them. You lose yourself, piece by piece, century by century, until you're not even sure who you were to begin with." I reached for her hand, threading my fingers through hers. "But you're still here," I said. "After 300 years, after losing everything, after becoming something you never asked to be, you're still fighting, still ruling, still collecting beautiful things and trying to maintain some kind of order in the chaos. That has to mean something. That has to be worth something." She looked at our joined hands, at the contrast between her pale, perfect skin and my sun-touched mortal flesh. "Or it means I'm too stubborn to quit," she said softly. "Too proud to admit defeat. Too afraid to find out what comes after this, if anything does. You think I'm strong, Lucian, but strength and cowardice often look the same from the outside." On the 10th day something shifted. I woke to find a note on my pillow, written in Seraphine's elegant script. "There is something I need to show you. Meet me in the East Tower at sunset. Come alone. Come prepared for the truth." The words carried a weight that made my stomach clench with anticipation and dread in equal measure. The East Tower was one of the few parts of the castle I hadn't yet explored, and as I climbed the spiral stairs as the sun began to set, I understood why. The air here was thick with old magic, and the walls were covered in protective sigils that seemed to pulse with faint light. The door at the top was sealed with 7 different locks, each one opening at Seraphine's touch as I arrived, until finally the way stood clear. The room beyond was circular, with windows looking out in all directions, and every surface was covered in books, scrolls, artifacts, and instruments I couldn't begin to identify. It was a study, I realized, or perhaps a laboratory, a place where someone had spent decades or centuries researching something with obsessive focus. Seraphine stood in the center of the room, her back to me, her wings folded tight against her spine. "This is where I come when I need to remember why I keep fighting," she said without turning. "This is where I keep my greatest hope and my deepest shame." She gestured to a table, and I approached to find it covered in documents. Medical texts, magical treatises, alchemical formulas, all of them annotated in multiple hands across multiple centuries. "For 300 years, Seraphine said, I have been searching for a cure. A way to reverse vampirism. A way to become human again. Or if not human, then at least something that isn't this." I stared at the documents, my mind racing. Is it possible? Can it be done? "I don't know," she admitted, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were haunted, ancient in a way they hadn't been before. "I've found theories, possibilities, half-finished rituals that might work or might just result in true death. I've tested them on volunteers, on prisoners, on myself when I was desperate enough. Some died. Some went mad. None became human. But I keep searching because the alternative is accepting that this is what I am, what I'll always be forever. She moved to the window, silhouetted against the dying light. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're considering, Lucian. You look at me and see power, immortality, freedom from mortal limitations. But I look in the mirror, or I would, if I could still see my reflection, and I see a monster who has been trying to claw her way back to humanity for 3 centuries and failing. If you ask me to turn you, if you choose to stay forever, I will do it. I'll give you the dark gift and bind you to me for eternity. But you need to know that I would be condemning you to the same search, the same endless hunger not just for blood, but for the humanity you'll have lost. Is that really what you want? Is that really love, or is it just me being selfish enough to trap someone else in my prison so I don't have to be alone? The weight of her words settled over me like a physical thing. I walked to her, taking her hand and turning her to face me. In the fading sunset, she looked more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her, less queen and more just a woman who had been alone for far too long. Maybe, I said carefully, you've been looking at it wrong. Maybe immortality isn't the prison. Maybe the prison is believing you have to suffer through it alone, that you have to keep searching for a cure for something that isn't actually a disease. You're not human anymore, Seraphine. You haven't been for 300 years. But that doesn't make you a monster. It just makes you different. And maybe, the cure you've been searching for isn't a spell or a ritual. Maybe it's just finding someone who sees what you are and doesn't need you to be anything else. She closed her eyes and more bloody tears tracked down her cheeks. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, I insisted. Maybe not easy but simple. You're asking me if I want to become what you are, knowing that it's hard, knowing that it comes with darkness and hunger and eternal struggle. And I'm telling you that I've watched you for 2 weeks, seen you at your most regal and your most vulnerable, watched you kill and watched you cry and watched you try so damn hard to hold on to some kind of honor and beauty in a world that's forgotten what those words mean. And if becoming like you means I get to stand beside you through that struggle, then yes, I want it. Not because I think immortality will solve my problems or make me happy, but because I think you and I together might be able to make something out of eternity that's worth living. We might be broken in complementary ways. Seraphine opened her eyes, and the look she gave me was so raw, so full of hope and fear and desperate longing, that it physically hurt to witness. You really mean that, she whispered. You're not just saying what you think I want to hear. You actually genuinely mean it. Every word, I confirmed. Though I do have one condition. Her expression shifted to cautious curiosity. What condition? Give me the full month you promised, I said. Don't turn me yet. Let me have these last weeks as a mortal so I can remember what it felt like, so I can say goodbye to the sun and food and sleep and everything else I'll be giving up. And let me go back to the city for a day to say goodbye to Marcus and Demon and the others, to tie up the loose ends of my mortal life. And then, when I come back, when I choose this with full knowledge and no regrets, then turn me, make me yours. And we'll face eternity together, and if we spend it searching for a cure that doesn't exist, at least we won't be searching alone. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her crimson eyes searching my face as if looking for any sign of doubt or deception. Then she pulled me into a kiss that was gentler than any we'd shared before, tinged with something that felt almost like reverence. 2 more weeks, she agreed against my lips. 2 more weeks and then I'll either let you walk away or I'll give you forever. Your choice, Lucian Avrith. But know that if you choose to stay, I will love you with everything I am, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret it. I already don't regret it, I told her, and pulled her back into the kiss as the last light faded from the sky and the tower room filled with shadows. Later that night, as we lay tangled together in her massive bed, she didn't sleep, but she indulged my mortal need for rest. I asked the question that had been nagging at me since Kieran had told me the story. The man who asked you to turn him, I said into the darkness. The one who went mad and burned himself. What was he like? Was he anything like me? Seraphine was quiet for so long that I thought she might not answer. Then, he was everything like you. Charming, reckless, brave in all the wrong ways. He flirted with me at a ball, danced with me on a balcony, made me laugh for the first time in decades. I tried to warn him away, tried to make him understand what he'd be giving up, but he was certain. So certain that love would be enough, that we would be enough. And for a while it was. For one beautiful, perfect year, I had a partner, a lover, someone who understood the darkness and wasn't afraid of it. And then the hunger started to change him. He began to see humans not as people but as food. He started to enjoy the killing more than he should. The darkness that he'd thought he could handle began to consume him from the inside, and I watched him transform from the man I loved into something twisted and wrong. When he finally stepped into the sun, I don't know if it was madness or mercy. I don't know if he was killing himself or killing the monster he'd become. And I've never forgiven myself for making him, for being selfish enough to think that love could be enough to sustain someone through the horror of what we are. I tightened my arms around her, feeling the coolness of her skin, the absence of heartbeat beneath my palm. "I'm not him," I said firmly. "I can't promise I won't struggle. I can't promise it won't be hard or that there won't be moments when I regret it. But I'm not him, Seraphine. I've seen darkness before. I've killed in war, I've survived when good men died, I've done things I'm not proud of to stay alive. I'm not walking into this with illusions about nobility or romance. I'm walking into it because I've found someone worth fighting for, and if I have to fight my own nature to stay myself, then that's what I'll do." She pressed her face against my chest and I felt wetness there, more blood tears soaking into my shirt. "I hope you're right," she whispered. "Because I don't think I can survive losing someone like you again. I don't think I have another 300 years in me if this goes wrong." I didn't have a response to that, so I just held her, running my fingers through her midnight hair, listening to the silence where a heartbeat should have been, and tried not to think about all the ways this could end in disaster. 2 weeks. 14 days to decide if I was really ready to leave behind every human thing I'd ever known. 14 days to convince myself that I wasn't making the same mistake her last lover had made. It should have felt like a countdown to doom. Instead, it felt like the first breath before diving into deep water, terrifying and exhilarating and inevitable all at once. I was going to do this. I was really going to do this. God's help us both. On the 14th day of my month in Castle Noctera, Lady Seraphine took me deeper into the earth than I'd ever gone before. We descended through levels of the undercroft I hadn't known existed, past the sleeping chambers of younger vampires and the prison cells that held creatures too dangerous to kill and too valuable to release, down into places where the stone itself seemed to pulse with ancient power. "There's something I need you to see," Seraphine said as we walked through corridors lit by phosphorescent fungi and crystals that glowed with captured moonlight. "Something I need you to understand before you make your final choice. The darkness at the heart of what I am." We came at last to a massive chamber, natural rather than carved, its ceiling lost in shadows above and its floor covered in intricate symbols painted in substances I was fairly certain were blood and bone and other things I couldn't identify. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and bound to it, not with chains but with magic that manifested as threads of crimson light, was a man. He was pale as death, his skin almost translucent, his eyes burning with a red light far more intense than Seraphine's crimson gaze. His body was covered in scars, and when he saw us approach, his lips pulled back to reveal fangs that were longer and sharper than any I'd seen, more like a predator's teeth than anything remotely human. "This," Seraphine said quietly, "is what I would have become if I hadn't fought it every day for 3 centuries. This is the hunger given form, the beast that lives inside every vampire, the thing we all struggle not to become." His name was Marcus, not your Marcus but another Marcus, another man who lived 300 years ago. He was my sire Lucian, the vampire who turned me. And when I was strong enough, I bound him here, because he had given in completely to the hunger, and there was nothing left in him that remembered being human or even being a thinking creature. He is appetite incarnate. Hunger without end. The cautionary tale every vampire tells their progeny. The creature that had once been Marcus strained against his bindings, snarling and snapping, his eyes fixed on me with a hunger so intense it was almost tangible. I could feel the weight of his gaze, could sense the thousands of ways he wanted to tear me apart and consume me, and it took every ounce of courage I possessed not to step back. "Why show me this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Why bring me here?" Because this is what waits at the end if you're not strong enough, Seraphine replied. Immortality is not a gift, Lucian. It's a test. Every day, every year, every century the hunger grows a little stronger, a little harder to resist. Most vampires lose themselves within a century or two. They become this pure hunger, pure predator, everything that made them individuals burned away by the endless need to feed. I've lasted 3 centuries by sheer stubbornness and by surrounding myself with reminders of beauty and humanity and everything worth preserving. But there's no guarantee that will be enough forever. There's no guarantee that in another century I won't be like him, and you, if you choose this, you'll face the same test. Can you look at this and still tell me you want it? Can you honestly say you're strong enough to resist becoming this? I stared at the snarling creature, at the madness and hunger in those burning eyes, and I thought about all the ways I'd survived in my mortal life. I'd survived war by staying focused on what I was fighting for rather than what I was fighting against. I'd survived poverty by finding joy in small things, by building connections with people who mattered. I'd survived a dozen brushes with death by refusing to give in to despair, by finding humor even in the darkest moments. I can't promise I'll never struggle, I said finally. I can't promise there won't be days or years or decades when the hunger feels overwhelming. But I've spent my entire life fighting not to become someone I'd hate. Fighting not to let the darkness in the world turn me into something dark. And if I have to keep fighting that same battle as a vampire, if I have to spend eternity consciously choosing to be more than just hunger, then at least I'll be fighting it with someone who understands, someone who's been fighting the same battle for 3 centuries and hasn't given up yet. We'll keep each other human, Seraphine. Or at least we'll keep each other ourselves. We'll be each other's anchor. She turned to me, and in the dim light of the chamber, with her sire snarling behind her, she looked more vulnerable than ever. You make it sound possible. You make it sound like love might actually be enough. Maybe it's not about love being enough, I suggested. Maybe it's about love giving us a reason to be enough for ourselves. I don't need you to save me, Seraphine, and you don't need me to save you. We're both already doing the work of saving ourselves. But maybe we can make that work easier by doing it together. Maybe we can be the reminder each other needs that the fight is worth it. She crossed the space between us in a blur of motion, pulling me into an embrace that was almost desperate in its intensity. Behind us, her sire continued to snarl and strain, a nightmare chorus to the moment. One more week, she whispered against my neck. One more week and then I'm either letting you go or keeping you forever. And gods, Lucian, I hope you still choose to stay because I don't think I can face another 3 centuries alone. I don't think I'm strong enough. You're the strongest person I've ever met, I told her honestly. And together we'll be unstoppable. Or we'll crash and burn spectacularly. But either way, at least we won't be alone. We left the chamber hand in hand, the snarling of the creature behind us fading as we ascended back toward the parts of the castle where light and life still held some meaning. But I carried the image of what I might become with me, a warning and a reminder and a promise to myself. I would not become that. I would not let the hunger consume everything I was. I would fight and I would endure and I would prove that love and will were stronger than any curse. On the 18th day, Seraphine gave me permission to return to the city, to see Marcus and Demon and say whatever goodbyes I needed to say. She arranged for a carriage drawn by those same unsettlingly intelligent horses, and as I rode through the gates of Castle Noctera, I felt the weight of the decision I was making settle more firmly over me. The city looked different through eyes that had spent nearly 3 weeks in a vampire's castle. The daylight felt harsh, almost painful after so many sunset to dawn days. The noise of market crowds and street vendors seemed overwhelming after the gothic quiet of the castle. And the people, gods, the people looked so fragile, so temporary, their lives burning bright and brief like candles in the wind. I found Marcus at our apartment, and the look of relief on his face when I walked through the door was almost enough to make me reconsider everything. Lucian, he breathed, crossing the room in 3 strides to grip my shoulders and look me over as if checking for injuries. Thank the gods. I thought, when you didn't come back after that first night, I thought you were dead. Or worse. What happened? What did she do to you? She offered me a choice, I said quietly, and I saw understanding dawn in Marcus's eyes, followed immediately by horror. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, Lucian, tell me you're not considering, tell me you're not actually thinking about." "I'm not thinking about it," I interrupted gently. "I've already decided. 5 days from now, I'm going back to Castle Noctera, and I'm asking her to turn me. And I came here to tell you goodbye, and to thank you for 5 years of friendship and for every time you tried to keep me from doing something stupid and for being the best friend I've ever had." Marcus staggered back as if I'd struck him, his face going pale. "You're serious? You're actually serious? Lucian, you don't know what you're giving up, what you're becoming?" "I know exactly what I'm becoming," I said firmly. "I've seen it, Marcus. I've seen the hunger and the darkness and the eternal struggle. And I've chosen it anyway because I've also seen someone who's been fighting that struggle for 3 centuries and still manages to find beauty in the world, still manages to care about things that matter. I've found someone worth fighting for and worth fighting alongside. And yes, maybe I'm making a mistake. Maybe I'll regret it in 100 years. But at least I'll have 100 years to regret it in, and I'll spend them with someone who understands me in ways no mortal ever could." Marcus was crying now, tears streaming down his face in a way I'd only seen once before, after a particularly brutal battle in the border wars. "I can't watch you do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't watch you throw away your humanity for someone you've known for 3 weeks. I can't, Lucian. I'm sorry, but I can't." I pulled him into a hug, feeling him shake against me. "I'm not asking you to watch. I'm just asking you to remember me as I was, and to understand that I'm choosing this with full knowledge of what it costs. And maybe in a few decades, when you're an old man with grandchildren and I'm still young and beautiful and terrible, maybe you'll visit me and we'll share a drink and remember the time when we were both young and stupid and trying to survive in a world that wanted to eat us alive." We talked for hours after that, reminiscing about old times, laughing about stupid things we'd done, carefully avoiding the subject of what was coming. And when I finally left as the sun was beginning to set, Marcus hugged me one more time and whispered, "I hope she's worth it. I hope she makes you happy or whatever vampires feel instead of happy. And I hope you prove me wrong about this being a terrible mistake." "Me too," I admitted. "Me too." I found Demon at his usual tavern, already 3 drinks deep despite the early hour, and when I told him about the wager, showed him the small pouch of gold that Seraphine had given me to prove I'd completed the challenge, he stared at me for a long moment before bursting into laughter. "You absolute madman," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually did it? You actually flirted with the vampire queen and lived to tell the tale. Though I'm guessing from that look in your eyes that you did more than just flirt." "Quite a bit more," I confirmed. "In fact, in 5 days I'm going back there permanently. She's going to turn me demon. I'm going to become a vampire." Demon's laughter died abruptly. He set down his drink and stared at me with the most serious expression I'd ever seen on his usually jovial face. "Is that what you really want? Or is this you running away from something? Because Lucian, you've always had a talent for running toward danger when what you're really doing is running away from yourself." I considered that, really considered it. Was I running away? From what? A life of poverty and small-time hustles and slowly growing old in a city that ground people down. Maybe. But I was also running toward something. Toward the possibility of meaning, of purpose, of a love that transcended the ordinary limits of human experience. "Maybe it's both," I said finally. "Maybe I'm running away from a life that was never going to be enough for me, and running towards someone who makes me feel like I could be more than just another face in the crowd. Is that wrong?" Demon shrugged. "Who am I to judge? I just challenged you to flirt with a vampire for 50 gold crowns, and now you're going to marry her or whatever vampires do. I think we're past the point where right or wrong even matters. But Lucian, be careful. And if you ever need help, if you ever need someone to remind you of who you were before all this, you know where to find me. Assuming vampires can still drink in taverns. I'll let you know," I promised, and we drank together until the sun set, toasting to bad decisions and unlikely friendships and futures that neither of us could quite imagine. The carriage was waiting for me as the last light faded from the sky, and as I rode back through the city toward Castle Noctera, I watched the lights coming on in windows, watched families gathering for evening meals, watched the ordinary, beautiful, temporary life of Valenmore unfolding around me. I was saying goodbye to all of it, to sunlight and human warmth and the simple certainty of mortality. And I found I was at peace with that. The final 5 days passed in a strange haze of anticipation and preparation. Seraphine treated them almost like a ritual, each day devoted to helping me understand and appreciate something I would be leaving behind. She had servants prepare elaborate meals for me, each one a masterpiece of culinary art that I savored with the knowledge that I would never taste food again after my transformation. She took me to the highest tower to watch the sunrise, letting me soak in the warmth and light that would become poison to me. She had me sleep during the day and stay awake through the nights, beginning to adjust my body to the rhythm I would keep for the rest of eternity. "I want you to remember," she explained on the 28th day, as we stood on the castle ramparts watching the sky shift from black to gray to pink to gold. "I want you to carry these memories with you so that you never forget what you've chosen to leave behind. So that when the hunger gets difficult, when the darkness feels overwhelming, you can remember the sun on your face and the taste of fresh bread and the simple joy of being warm. Those memories will be your anchor, Lucian. Hold on to them." On the 29th day she took me to her private library and showed me journals, dozens of them, hundreds of them, covering centuries of her existence. "I write every day," she told me, running her fingers over leather-bound spines. "Every single day I record something, a thought, a memory, a feeling, something I saw or experienced that moved me. Because memory fades, Lucian, especially for our kind. If I don't write it down, if I don't preserve it somehow, it slips away like water through my fingers. This is how I've kept myself anchored for 3 centuries. This is how I remember who I am and who I want to be. When you wake after your transformation, I'll give you your own journal. And I'll ask you to write, every day, something that reminds you of your humanity. Will you do that for me? Will you do that for yourself?" I promised I would, and she kissed me with a tenderness that felt almost sad, almost like she was already mourning what I was about to lose. The 30th day arrived with a weight of finality that made every moment feel crystalline, significant. This was my last day as a mortal. My last day being fully human. Tonight, when the sun set, I would either walk away from Castle Noctera and resume my ordinary life, or I would cross a threshold that could never be uncrossed. I spent the day in my chambers, writing letters to Marcus and Demon and the few other friends I'd made over the years, trying to explain a decision that I wasn't entirely sure I understood myself. I told them I loved them, that I was grateful for their friendship, that I hoped they would remember me kindly. I didn't know if I would be allowed to see them after my transformation, if Seraphine would permit it, if I would want to risk exposing them to what I would become. As the sun began to set, Seraphine came to my room dressed in a gown of deep crimson that seemed to shimmer and shift in the fading light. Her wings were spread wide, magnificent and terrible, and her eyes held an intensity one hadn't seen before, hunger and sorrow and anticipation all mixed together. "It's time," she said simply. "But before we proceed, I need to ask you one final time, is this truly what you want? There is no shame in choosing to leave, Lucian. I will give you gold and safe passage and the memory of 3 extraordinary weeks, and you can live out your mortal life knowing you were brave enough to dance with death and clever enough to walk away. Or you can stay and I will transform you, and you will be mine and I will be yours for as long as we both endure. Choose now. Choose freely. Choose finally." I stood and crossed to her, taking her cool hands in my warm ones, looking up into those ancient crimson eyes. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "I'm terrified of losing myself, of becoming something monstrous, of proving too weak to handle what you are. But I'm more terrified of walking away, of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been, of dying alone with nothing but regrets and what-ifs. So yes, this is what I want. Turn me, Seraphine. Make me yours. Show me eternity." She closed her eyes and I saw her take a breath she didn't need, steadying herself. "Then come with me. The transformation cannot happen just anywhere. It requires preparation, ritual, intention. I've been preparing the chamber for days." She led me through the castle to a room I'd never seen before, deep in the private section of her quarters. It was circular, with a high ceiling painted with constellations, and the floor was covered in symbols similar to those in the chamber where her sire was bound, but these were silver rather than red, and they seemed to pulse with a gentler, more purposeful light. Candles floated in the air, hundreds of them, filling the space with soft illumination. In the center of the room stood a low platform covered in crimson silk. "Lie down," Seraphine instructed, and I did, my heart racing as the reality of what was about to happen crashed over me in waves. She knelt beside me, her wings folding around us both, creating a cocoon of darkness and crimson light. "The transformation will hurt," she told me, her voice gentle but honest. "My venom will feel like fire in your veins, and your body will fight it because everything in you that's human will recognize this as death. You'll feel yourself dying, Lucian. You'll feel your heart slow and stop. You'll feel the cold creep through your limbs. And then, if you're strong enough, if you have the will to endure it, you'll feel yourself reborn. Change. The process takes 3 days. I'll stay with you through all of it, but I won't be able to ease the pain. I can only witness it and wait to see who you become on the other side." "I understand," I whispered. "I'm ready." She leaned down, pressing her forehead to mine, and I felt the cool silk of her hair falling around us like a curtain. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'm sorry for what this will cost you. I'm sorry I'm selfish enough to do it anyway. But I've been alone for so long, Lucian, and you make me remember what it felt like to hope. So I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to transform you and keep you and pray to gods I don't believe in that you'll be strong enough to survive what I'm making you. Then stop apologizing and kiss me," I said. "One last time as the man I am now." She did, deeply and slowly, and I memorized the feel of it, the coolness of her lips, the faint taste of copper, the way her body felt against mine, simultaneously soft and hard, yielding and unyielding. And then she moved her lips from my mouth to my throat, and I felt her fangs pierce my skin, sharp and precise, and the world exploded into sensation. It started as pressure, a pulling feeling as she began to drink, and for a moment it was almost pleasant, intimate and strange and nothing like I'd imagined. But then I felt it, the venom spreading from the bite like liquid fire through my veins. It burned. Gods, it burned like nothing I'd ever experienced, worse than any battlefield wound, worse than any fever. It felt like my blood was boiling, like my veins were conduits for molten metal, and I heard someone screaming before I realized it was me. Seraphine pulled back, her lips stained with my blood, and I saw the agony in her eyes as she watched me writhe on the silk platform. "Fight it," she urged, her voice cutting through the pain. "Don't give in, Lucian. Hold on to yourself. Remember who you are. Remember why you chose this." I tried to focus on her words, tried to hold on to the memories she'd helped me create over the past month. Sunlight on my face, the taste of wine, Marcus's laughter, the feel of her lips on mine. But the pain was overwhelming, drowning out thought, reducing me to nothing but sensation. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, too fast, irregular, and then beginning to slow. I felt cold creeping through me, starting at my extremities and working inward, as if winter itself was claiming my body. I was dying. Actually, truly dying. And the most terrifying part was that some primal part of me wanted to fight it, wanted to cling to life, but I had to consciously force myself to let go, to surrender to the transformation, to trust that there would be something on the other side. Time lost meaning. I couldn't have said if minutes or hours had passed. The pain continued in waves, sometimes ebbing to a bearable ache, sometimes cresting to such intensity that I wished for true death just to make it stop. Through it all, Seraphine stayed beside me, her cool hand in mine, her voice a constant anchor as she talked me through it, telling me stories of her own transformation, reminding me that she had survived this and so could I. At some point I became aware that my heart had stopped beating. Just stopped. The silence in my chest was deafening, terrifying, a wrongness that made me want to claw at my own rib cage. But I was still aware, still thinking, still existing in some form. Was this death? Was this the in-between? And then, slowly, impossibly, I began to feel different sensations emerging from the pain. My senses were sharpening. I could hear things I'd never heard before, the whisper of air moving through the castle, the rustle of fabric from rooms away, the sound of blood moving through Seraphine's borrowed veins. I could smell everything, stone and silk and candle wax and Seraphine's unique scent of roses and night. When I finally managed to open my eyes, the world looked different, clearer somehow, colors more vivid, shadows less opaque. Lucian. Seraphine's voice was cautious, hopeful. Can you hear me? I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from screaming. Instead, I nodded, and even that simple movement felt strange, too fast, too precise. The worst is over, she said, relief flooding her features. Your heart has stopped, but you're still here. You're transitioning. Over the next 2 days, the venom will finish its work, reshaping your body, changing everything at a fundamental level. The pain will come and go, but it will never be as bad as that first wave. You're going to survive this, Lucian. You're going to make it through. The second day was more bearable, though bearable was relative. The fire in my veins had settled to a constant burn rather than the excruciating inferno of the first day. I could think more clearly, could hold conversations with Seraphine, could begin to process what was happening to me. She brought me blood to drink, animal blood at first, to ease me into the new reality, and I discovered to my combined relief and horror that it tasted good. Better than good. It satisfied a hunger I hadn't even known I was feeling. That's the beast waking up, Seraphine explained as I drained the goblet she provided. The part of you that's vampire now, that recognizes blood as sustenance and power. Over time, animal blood won't be enough. You'll crave human blood, and I'll teach you how to feed without killing, how to maintain the control that separates us from true monsters. But for now, this is enough. You're doing so well, Lucian. Better than I dared hope. On the third day, the pain finally faded to nothing, leaving behind a strange, weightless feeling, as if gravity had loosened its hold on me. I stood for the first time, and the movement was too fast, too fluid. I crossed to a mirror that Seraphine had placed in the chamber, and I stared at my reflection, except it wasn't there. The mirror showed the room, the candles, Seraphine standing behind me, but where I should have been, there was nothing. Just empty space. You'll adjust to it, Seraphine said softly, her hands coming to rest on my shoulders, shoulders I could feel but couldn't see. It's unsettling at first, seeing others but not yourself. But in time you'll learn to define yourself by what you do, by how you affect the world around you, rather than by what you look like. You'll learn to exist without the constant feedback of your own reflection. I turned away from the mirror to face her, and I saw her through new eyes now, saw the way she moved with too much grace, saw the subtle glow in her eyes, saw the careful control she maintained over every gesture. I saw her as one vampire seeing another, and I understood in that moment that I had truly crossed over, truly become something other than human. How do you feel? She asked, and I heard the vulnerability in her voice, the fear that I would blame her, would regret what she'd made me. I took her hands in mine and pulled her close, and I marveled at the fact that her skin no longer felt cool to me. We were the same temperature now, both of us dwelling in the space between life and death. I feel powerful, I admitted, and hungry, and terrified, and alive in a way I never was before, even though I know I'm technically dead. And I feel grateful, Seraphine, that you were selfish enough to do this, that you wanted me enough to transform me. Because I think we're going to be magnificent together. She kissed me then, and it was different than every kiss before because now we were equals, both of us dwelling in darkness, both of us carrying the same hunger and the same curse and the same desperate hope that love might be enough to sustain us through eternity. Welcome to forever, she whispered against my lips. Welcome to the night, and the hunger, and the endless beautiful terrible journey we're going to take together. I love you, Lucian Avrith. I loved you when you were mortal, and I love you now as one of us. And I promise you, I will spend every day of our immortality trying to prove that this was worth it, that you made the right choice. I already know I did, I told her honestly. Ask me again in 100 years and I'll tell you the same thing. And there, in a circular chamber painted with constellations and lit by floating candles, the vampire queen and her newly made consort held each other as dawn broke over the world outside. A dawn we could no longer see, a sun we could no longer feel, a mortal life we had both left behind in pursuit of something stranger and darker and infinitely more precious. The tavern hadn't changed much in 2.5 decades. The same scarred wooden tables, the same questionable stains on the floor, the same smell of cheap ale and cheaper dreams. But the man sitting in the corner nursing a drink, he had changed. Marcus's hair had gone gray at the temples, and lines creased his face in ways that suggested both laughter and sorrow had marked their territory. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment, fear flashed across his features before recognition settled in. "Lucian," he breathed, and his voice cracked on my name. "Gods, you haven't aged a day. You look exactly the same as the night I said goodbye," I finished, sliding into the seat across from him. "I know. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. I needed time to learn control, to become stable enough that I wouldn't be a danger to anyone I cared about. How have you been, old friend?" Marcus laughed, but it sounded bitter. "Old is right. Look at me, Lucian. I'm 53 years old. I have grandchildren. I'm a different person than the man you left behind. But you're still 28, still young and beautiful and frozen in time. It's not fair. It's not right." "No," I agreed quietly. "It's not. But it's what I chose, and I've made my peace with it. I miss the sun sometimes. I miss the taste of food. I miss being able to walk through the market during the day without careful preparation. But I've also seen things you can't imagine, Marcus. I've traveled to places that exist in the spaces between the mortal and supernatural worlds. I've learned magic and history and secrets that have been buried for millennia. And I've spent every day of the past 25 years with someone who understands me completely, who challenges me and supports me and loves me in ways I never thought possible. It's been hard and there have been dark days, but I don't regret it. Not for a moment." Marcus was quiet for a long time, turning his cup between his weathered hands. "Demon died 5 years ago," he finally said. "Drank himself to death," the healer said, "though I think it was more that he just gave up. He never quite recovered after you left. He felt guilty, for that wager. Thought he'd essentially bet your life and lost." The news hit me harder than I expected, and I felt something in my chest constrict even though my heart no longer beat. "I need you to know something," I said, leaning forward. "What happened with Seraphine, it wasn't because of the wager. The wager was just the excuse I gave myself to do something I would have done anyway. I saw her that night and I just knew that she was going to change my life. The 50 gold crowns were never the point. Tell me you understand that. Tell me you'll remember that so Demon's memory doesn't carry that guilt." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll remember. And Lucian, I'm glad you're happy. Or whatever vampires feel instead of happy. I'm glad you found something worth dying for. Even if it means I'm going to lose you all over again someday when I finally shuffle off this mortal coil and you keep going, young and immortal and brilliant." "You're not going to lose me," I said firmly. "I'll be here, Marcus. When you're an old man on your deathbed, I'll be there to hold your hand and remind you of every stupid thing we did together. And after you're gone, I'll visit your grave and tell you stories about what immortality is like. You'll never really leave me because I'll carry you in my memory for as long as I exist. That's what Seraphine taught me, that the way we honor the mortals we love is by remembering them, by preserving them in story and memory and the choices we make. You'll live forever through me, my friend. I promise you that." We talked for hours after that, catching up on 25 years of divergent lives, and when I finally left as dawn approached, Marcus hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for proving that you didn't completely leave us behind." I returned to Castle Noctera as the first light of dawn painted the sky pink and gold, colors I could no longer safely witness directly but could see reflected in the faces of the few early risers in the city. Seraphine was waiting for me in our chambers, and she looked up from the journal she was writing in with a smile that still made my dead heart feel something that might as well be love. "How was it?" she asked. "Seeing him again after all this time?" "Harder than I expected," I admitted, settling beside her and pulling her into my arms. Seeing him age, seeing the weight of mortal life on him, it reminded me of everything I gave up. Everything I'll never have again. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, and I heard the fear beneath the question, the worry that had probably lived in her for 25 years. I kissed her, slowly and thoroughly, and then pulled back to look into those crimson eyes that had first captured me on a balcony under a full moon. "Not even for a second," I told her honestly. "Every moment with you has been worth everything I sacrificed. And I'd make the same choice again, 1,000 times over." She smiled then, radiant and relieved, and pulled me down onto our bed as the sun rose over a world we could no longer walk in. We spent the day as we spent most days, talking, reading, making love, existing in the comfortable intimacy of two beings who had chosen each other against all reason and found that sometimes, the most irrational choices were the ones that made the most sense. That evening, as we prepared to rise and face another night, I sat down with the journal she had given me 25 years ago, now filled with entries documenting my transformation, my struggles, my triumphs, my endless attempts to remain myself in the face of immortality's grinding weight. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, Day 9131. 25 years since I became what I am. Saw Marcus today. He's old now, gray and lined and beautiful in the way that mortal lives are beautiful. Finite, precious, temporary. I miss the sun. I miss the taste of wine. I miss the simplicity of being human. But I have Seraphine. I have purpose. I have eternity stretching before me like an undiscovered country. And I have the memory of a foolish mortal who once flirted with a vampire queen on a balcony, thinking he was playing a game, not realizing he was writing the opening chapter of a love story that would span centuries. I was an idiot. I was magnificent. I was exactly as broken as I needed to be to survive this. And I would do it all again. I closed the journal and looked up to find Seraphine watching me, her expression soft with the kind of affection that had taken decades to fully develop, to move beyond passion and into something deeper and more enduring. Ready to face the night? She asked, extending her hand. I took it, rising to stand beside her, and together we moved toward the balcony where our story had begun, where a mortal fool had dared to approach immortal power with nothing but charm and recklessness, and where a lonely queen had found someone brave enough or stupid enough to make eternity seem bearable. The moon was rising, full and bright, just as it had been that first night. But this time I stood beside her not as mortal and vampire, but as equals, both of us creatures of darkness, both of us fighting the same endless battle to remain ourselves in the face of immortality's grinding weight. And as we stood there, two monsters choosing to be more than their hunger, two immortals refusing to surrender to eternity's emptiness, I realized something profound. I had flirted with a vampire queen for fun, thinking I was playing a game, thinking I was winning a wager. But the truth was she had been the one playing the game all along. She had let me think I was charming her, seducing her, winning her attention through sheer audacity. But really she had been searching for centuries for someone broken in exactly the right ways, someone foolish enough to choose darkness and brave enough to face it without flinching. She had been hunting for me as surely as I'd thought I was pursuing her. And we had found each other on a Gothic balcony beneath a full moon, two souls recognizing in each other the partner they'd need to survive forever. What are you thinking? Seraphine asked, and I heard genuine curiosity in her voice. I turned to her, pulling her close, feeling the weight of 25 years and the promise of centuries more stretching before us. I'm thinking that I came to your ball expecting to win 50 gold crowns and a good story. And instead, I want eternity. I'm thinking that's either the best or worst trade in human history, and I still haven't decided which. She laughed, the sound echoing across the night, and pulled me into a kiss that tasted of blood and roses and forever. Does it matter? She murmured against my lips. Best or worst, you're here. We're here. And we have all of eternity to figure out which it is. Then let's get started, I said, and together we stepped off the balcony, our wings spreading wide as we took to the air, two dark shapes against the moon, flying toward whatever adventures the night would bring. Behind us, Castle Noctera stood silent and magnificent, home to monsters and misfits and creatures caught between life and death. And somewhere in the city below, Marcus raised his glass in a silent toast to a friend he'd lost and found and would lose again, knowing that some stories don't have happy endings, they just have endings that make sense, that feel right, that honor the choices we make and the prices we pay for them. I had flirted with a vampire queen for fun, not expecting it to change my whole life. But it had. And I wouldn't have had it any other way.